Astronomers have only known about gamma-ray bursts since the Cold War. In the 1960s, the U.S. Air Force launched the Vela series satellites to watch the Earth for Soviet nuclear tests.
One day, Vela detected a pulse of gamma rays, but it couldn't be coordinated with anything. It didn't seem to be anything on Earth. It seemed to be somewhere out in space.
The electromagnetic pulse that this generates will cripple an entire hemisphere of the globe. Half the world is going dark. The other half would know something was up if there was any kind of live stream going on, any kind of sports event coverage. This all goes dark. Feeds are cut off. Social media goes quiet in this area. What happened? Did Europe get bombed?
At the largest U.S. Air Force base in the Middle East, senior officers are desperate for answers because military hardware is designed with electromagnetic shielding. Computer systems are still working and scanning the airspace.
The energy that's coming into the atmosphere would be pretty much like blowing off several nuclear bombs right overhead.
Fighter jets are scrambled to investigate potential nuclear launch sites.
Absolute chaos.
As people run for cover, they face an inferno of blazing homes and buildings. There is no safe place to seek refuge. Across the Atlantic Ocean, Puerto Rico is on the edge of the impact zone. The gamma-ray energy is greatly diluted here.
For those on the edge, that pulse has to travel through more atmosphere because of the curvature of the Earth.
The crew on the container ship that's been taking in a brilliant light show watches as it's suddenly replaced by a fast-moving electrical storm. They immediately take cover in the safety of the ship's interior. But the lightning storm is only one of the calling cards of a gamma-ray burst. The Earth is about to get radioactive.
If you're on the periphery, on the edges, the gamma-ray pulse has to travel through a little bit more atmosphere, and you have a better chance of survival. A person directly underneath the muon cascade receives about a 10 times lethal dose. If you're on the periphery of the planet, you might be fortunate enough to get an only one, or maybe just slightly less than one. You might survive it.
And so for those people lucky enough to survive the initial chaos of the gamma-ray burst would face a much longer-term problem, and that is cancer, starting 5 years after the initial shock. And that's why 5 years after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that's when the first cancers were seen in the form of leukemia. The effect of it would cascade to give you a collapse of telecommunications. We would see a massive short-circuiting of all major electrical systems on the planet Earth.
A good reason to be a prepper? Think back to the rooftops of homes in New Orleans with people holding up signs, "Help me." Suppose they'd had a week or two worth of supplies there until help arrived. How many hundreds of people died horrible deaths in New Orleans that could have been saved if basic supplies were on hand?
The usual crowds of summer beachgoers are nowhere to be seen. From San Diego to Galveston to Daytona Beach, the few people moving around in the 100-degree heat are covered from head to toe.
If we were to suddenly remove the top 30 feet of life-giving food in the ocean, everything else would begin to suffer. It's what we call a trophic collapse. The food chain itself collapses.
That breakdown at that level, frightening. How do we reorganize a society when we don't have communications and command and control? That triggers panic, triggers fear, triggers a breakdown of social order.
The grim scene in America pales in comparison to the regions nearest to the equator. From Panama to Colombia to northern Brazil, the ultraviolet radiation is far more dangerous to human life. UV exposure is 35% more intense at the equator because the sun's rays have a shorter distance to travel through the depleted atmosphere.
The accumulated doses of UVB will be tremendous. So the effects on the skin and molecules will be increased dramatically. The incidence of cataracts, blindness, cancer will increase dramatically.
Quito, Ecuador's capital city, sits empty. Because it's near the equator and at high elevation, that puts it closer to the sun. It's the most vulnerable city on Earth to the dangers of UV radiation. The survivors have been forced to flee. Dozens of other large cities in South and Central America are also empty.
So if your goal is to live a more normal life, normal relative to how it was pre-gamma ray burst, you might find yourself migrating towards the nearest pole.
Millions swarm into Argentina, closer to the South Pole. While refugees in North America trek hundreds of miles into Canada and Alaska.
We have to go. My daughter's already there.
Just a few minutes.